And joining me now from Beijing is Xu Sitao. He is Chief Economist and Partner with Deloitte China. And with me in the studio is Amy Selico. She is a Principal at the Albright Stonebridge Group, where she heads the China team. And from Portland in the U.S. state of Oregon, Yang Liang, she is Professor of Economics at Willamette University. And also here in the studio is Adam Posen, President of the Peterson Institute for International Economics. Thanks so much for all of you for joining us. Let's start in Beijing. Sitao, these numbers that came in from the Chinese economy for 2017, ahead of expectations, is it now possible for this higher level of growth to continue in 2018, given the headwinds that we're also seeing?
I think it's going to be difficult. Numbers were very extraordinary last year, mainly because two reasons. One is synchronized global recovery, so external sector actually creating 2% of GDP growth. External sector was creating 0 in 2016. Now, given a very high base effect, I think even global recovery continues, I think the contribution will be smaller this year. Secondly, in 2017, property sector was very strong. The Chinese government had made it very clear and wants to control bubbles in property sector and wants to promote rental market. So I think the similar magnitude of GDP growth is unlikely to be achieved.
Amy, obviously China benefited from global growth. I mean, it's one of these rare occasions where we see all major economies and regions all growing at the same time. Good news. Are we expecting a cooling because of China-specific headwinds? I mean, obviously, there is a big rebalancing going on in the economy. What are you looking at?
Well, for our clients at Albright Stonebridge Group, we're looking at the Chinese economy in two very distinct ways. One, obviously, is the huge opportunity that it brings to so many companies, whether they're American, European, whatever nation.
And where is that? Is that amongst the growing consumer class inside China?
Absolutely, absolutely. And the U.S.-China Business Council just came out with their statistics looking at what was the size of American opportunity in the China market in 2017, if you include our exports and then American production in China, $600 billion in 2017. So clearly, for many of our clients, we still see so many opportunities for growth. And the Chinese government is saying that they want so many American goods and services to help fuel this rebalanced economy. On the other hand, and where the real challenge is for our clients as well as for the global economy is, will China really begin to be an international market that behaves by the same standards and adheres to the same rules as others?
You're talking about market access here, aren't you?
Or does it want to create new rules for how to govern global trade?
Where do you think that's going? What are you advising your clients?
We're advising our clients that it's going to be a difficult year because clearly the U.S. administration, and I will be quick to add the Europeans as well, are saying we're seeing imbalances that are harming our domestic economies. The Trump administration, as we all know, is focused on the trade deficit. The goods deficit this year is higher than last year with China. And so that is a significant concern. But as we're advising our clients, that is not the entire story. You have to also look at where will the Chinese economy really focus on reform? And will, as we heard in Davos last month, China really make unprecedented openings this year? That's what was promised.
Yan, in Portland, Oregon, where is the growth? Because we've seen a big slowdown in manufacturing, but we've also seen a huge attention by the government and from everyone on down on innovation. Where is the growth that led to these good, much better than expected figures in 2017? And are you expecting the same for 2018?
Well, I wanted to echo what has been said. I think, last year's high growth was really higher than expected. We won't know this year's target until March. That's when they're going to talk about this year, officially talking about this year's target. But, some numbers have been thrown around, something like, 6.8%, which is still pretty high. In terms of, growth, I think you're right. Innovation is probably one of the fields that could lead the growth. Manufacturing is slowing down, and that's sort of one of the commitments, right, of Beijing. They were talking about this 3-year battle to fight against, debt, poverty, and pollution. So one of the things with, structural reform is we want to move from, environmental destructive industries, some of the sort of steel capacity, for example. Last year, there's been a reduction in the steel production by 15 metric tons and coal production by 10 million tons. So you're right. So manufacturing is not going to be the sort of the powerhouse in the coming years. So hopefully, innovation will be one of this sort of growth momentum. And I think Beijing also, as they just recently announced, that they're going to remove some of the caps of foreign companies to enter China in the financial system. So we could possibly expect a rising financial sector with hopefully better quality of loans and all of that. Yeah. And just to add one more thing, I think last year's high growth was also driven again by that $13 trillion of total social financing, which again, I think presents a dilemma to Beijing, because on the one hand, they wanted to deleverage, reducing corporate debt, household debt, but yet on the other hand, they need credit in order to promote growth. Yeah. So I would say 2018 is an interesting year, would be a lot of challenges.
Yeah, I want to follow up on the debt question, because that is sort of one thing in the world is watching. Just explain for our audience, it's quite high, about 234% of GDP, but it's not debt like we see in other countries. The central government holds little debt. Where is the debt, and how dangerous is it for 2018?
Right. So in China, it's interesting. The debt is pretty much harbored by the corporate sector. So depending on the number that you read, IMF will put the debt to GDP ratio to 345%, where other institutions put a slightly lower number. But the great majority of the debt is in the corporate sector. The household sector, the public sector do not have unparalleled sort of level of debt compared to other countries or compared to emerging markets. But the corporate debt, if we take the number provided by the IIF, the Institute of International Finance, last year the debt to GDP ratio in China is about 256%, and corporate sector alone accounts for 163%. So the great majority of debt is in the corporate sector. And the difficulty here is not just the rising amount of debt, but the quality of debt has been declining because a lot of the debt comes from the shadow banking sector. And coupled with that, the corporate sector has been slowing in terms of their private investment, which is one of the initiatives of Beijing trying to slow down sort of investment-driven growth. So here presents a great dilemma to the corporate sector, right? On the one hand, they need to slow down, but on the other hand, they have this climbing debt mountain that I have to somehow, pay. So on the one hand, the debt obligation is increasing. On the other hand, the capacity to pay is declining. And so that led a lot of commentators to sort of cry about this China's Minsky moment. Right. The idea is that, if China does not manage well that it could have a financial collapse.